video, we are going to go through how to design monitoring activities. Now remember that firms are required to establish a monitoring and remediation process, and this is going to provide you with that relevant, reliable, timely information about the design and implementation and the operation of your quality management system. And that's going to allow you to take that appropriate action to respond to any identified deficiencies so that they can be remediated on a timely basis. So as part of that process, you're going to need to design and perform monitoring activities to provide a basis for the identification of those deficiencies. Now, the standard does only have one required monitoring activity, and that is for completed file inspection. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Now, professional judgment is definitely going to need to be exercised when you are determining the nature, the timing, and extent of your monitoring activities. So if you go to the Monitoring and Remediation tab, if you don't have our template or this is the first time in your system, you probably don't have any activities developed in here. So we're going to go about this a little bit differently. So when we are designing those monitoring activities, we're going to design them around certain policies and procedures. So I'm going to take you back to the policies and procedures section in order to develop those monitoring activities. Now, again, we do need to use some professional judgment. The standard does not tell us how much and how many monitoring activities that we need to perform, even the nature of those monitoring activities. This is where you're going to need to use a lot of professional judgment. What is the underlying risk and the risk assessment that led to the requirement to have that policy or procedure there? If you have an associated risk that is a high risk, if that risk happened, you would issue an incorrect report, you wouldn't meet your objectives, you could get sued. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. Those ones you probably want to monitor a little bit more frequently. If you have something where, it is maybe a required procedure, but there's not really an associated risk, or maybe there is an associated risk, but it's really kind of on the lower side, then maybe I don't need to monitor that on an annual basis. Maybe I need to monitor that every 3 years, or maybe I don't need to monitor it at all. So you're going to have to use some judgment when it comes into this. So what I would suggest then is to go through each of the policies and procedures, look back to say, is there an associated risk, and then make that determination. Let's just walk through a couple of these so I can provide you with a little bit of examples of what these monitoring activities would look like. So our first policy is on new firm information. There is a CSQM1 reference, which means it is a specified response. I didn't have really any directly associated risks. So when I start to think about the monitoring activities, I want to take a look, well, what is that policy that I'm doing? If there's been any changes to the firm, to the way that they operate business, maybe I want to make sure that my system has picked up any of those changes. So while I may not have a direct risk, maybe this is something that on an annual basis, I want to make sure that either as partner or as if you're performing these monitoring activities for another firm, that you've just maybe asked the question. So underneath this plus button is where I'm going to add my monitoring activity to that particular policy or procedure. This will come up automatically, the risk response. The classification really is just going to help us sort the monitoring activities so that when we go to do them, they're grouped together. So there's a number of different types of monitoring activities that we could do. We could interview the staff, we could interview partners, there might be a quality leader interview that we could make. There could be some engagement level policies requiring us to go into working papers to see if they were adhered to. Could be looking at personnel or staff files. Ongoing is something that could be built into your firm that is done on a continuous basis, not on an annual or semi-annual basis, but it is done somewhat constantly. So it could be ongoing or other. Maybe you've decided that you don't need to do monitoring at all. You could just select none. Now, in this case, I think we need to have an interview with the partner. For the frequency, I'm going to say that should be done on an annual basis. So basically what I think we need to do is just ask about whether there was any changes in the nature and circumstances of the firm and evaluate whether that quality management system does require any amendments. So this is just an inquiry, which is a periodic type of monitoring activity. If I say add activity, you're now going to see that along that policy or procedure, I now have this monitoring activity. I can always click on it and see that monitoring activity. If I make any changes, remembering to press save. Now, I could add more than one monitoring activity to that as well. Maybe I also need to do some type of ongoing. So if you are doing an ongoing, maybe this is just built into your system. Maybe you are a sole practitioner and involved in all decisions. So maybe you don't need to do something specific. Maybe it's just something that you have built into your system. So again, I could have multiple monitoring activities for that. So I'm going to go through then every policy or procedure and think about what is it that I want to do to make sure that policy or procedure is in place. These completed file inspections are a required monitoring activity. We're going to do a completely separate video on completed file inspections because they're unique. We've addressed them a little bit differently. So there'll be a separate video that you'll want to have a look at on the completed file inspections. Now, when I go into my monitoring and remediation tab, I am going to see those two monitoring activities that I just set up. So remember, before there wasn't anything. They've grouped them, remember, under those classifications. So this is going to allow me, when I go to actually do the monitoring, to say, I'm going to do all my partner interviews at the same time, and I'm going to be able to go in and perform those monitoring. If I had more than one interview, it would show up underneath. So it's going to group these all by classification. So once you have all of those set up, your monitoring system has then been